The goal of all life, and of particular interest to human beings, is the union with our source. Some call it God, others Heavenly Father, the heart of Christ, Atman, total goodness, infinite awareness, cosmic consciousness, or simply the truth. Whatever name you give it, just know that to we humans our Creator is invisible, unthinkable, unnameable, unspeakable love. This is why the Master was silent when Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" This little book, the Kybalion, calls our I Am Source the All, because there's nothing and nowhere the All isn't. If it were otherwise, it wouldn't be the All. There are an infinite number of planes, worlds, dimensions, and realms, all of them inhabited by living beings teach us, once we no longer fear them. These beings range from atoms, protozoa, extraterrestrials, angels, archangels, gods, and demigods, each with a peculiar message for every one of us from our source. There are, in fact, some beings so advanced that they lovingly look upon humanity as we would look at a petri dish of one-celled organisms. Yet among all these varied life forms, humans stand out as particularly advantaged in uncovering the treasures available in the many mansions of the All. But most of us are still living as unaware characters in what could best be called a simulated video game. Most of us are mere subjects imprisoned in an old game like, say, the Mario Brothers, trying to survive by overcoming many challenges and obstacles. But others are tired of the game and determined to connect with the source in order to understand the simulation and become players in the game rather than mere subjects within it. Imprisoned people often prefer the safety and security of prison to the initial instability of higher freedom, even though they're forced to leave the game in the end anyway. The next dimension outside of the prison involves learning to fly like the angels. But this can be uneasy for beginners, as learning to walk is for a toddler. In this condensed version of the Kybalion, we may start learning not only how to tell time, but to actually learn to build the timepiece itself. Introducing the Kybalion by the three initiates, condensed and simplified. Our intent is not to erect a new temple of knowledge, but rather to place in the hands of the student a master key with which he may open the many doors in the temple of mystery. There's no portion of the esoteric teachings possessed by the world which have been so closely guarded as the fragments of the Hermetic teachings which have come down to us over the tens of centuries which have elapsed since the lifetime of its great founder, Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes, known as the scribe of the gods, dwelt in old Egypt in the days when this present race of men was in its infancy. Also known as Thoth, builder of the pyramids in Egypt, and Enoch of the Old Testament, Hermes was the instructor of the great sage Abraham. All the great teachings of every civilization may be traced back to Hermes. Even the most ancient teachings of India undoubtedly have their roots in the original Hermetic teachings. From the land of the Ganges, many advanced esoterics wandered to the land of Egypt and sat at the feet of the Master. And thus the secret doctrine was firmly established. From other lands also came the learned ones, all of whom regarded Hermes as the master of masters. The life work of Hermes seems to have been in the direction of planting the great seed truth, which has grown and blossomed in so many strange forms, but nevertheless, the original truths taught by him have been kept intact in their original purity and reserved their truth for the few who are ready to comprehend and master it. From lip to ear, the truth has been handed down among the few. There have always been a few initiates in each generation in the various lands of the earth who have kept alive the sacred flame of the Hermetic teachings. And such have always been willing to use their lamps to relight the lesser lamps of the outside world when the light of truth grew dim and clouded by reason of neglect. There were always a few to tend faithfully the altar of truth which kept alight the perpetual lamp of wisdom. These souls devoted their lives to the labor of love, which the poet has so well stated in these lines. "Oh, let not the flame die out, cherished age after age, in its dark cavern by pure ministers of love. Let not the flame die out." These souls have never sought popular approval, nor numbers of followers. They are indifferent to these things, for they know how few there are in each generation ready for the truth, or who would recognize it if it were presented to them. But still, these great souls have never forgotten nor overlooked the original teachings of Hermes regarding the passing on of the words of truth to those ready to receive it. Where fall the footsteps of the Master, the ears of those ready for his teachings open wide. When the ears of the student are ready to hear, then cometh the lips to fill them with wisdom. The lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. There are those who have criticized this attitude of the Hermeticists, and who have claimed that they did not manifest the proper spirit in their policy of seclusion. But a moment's glance back over the pages of history will show the wisdom of the masters who knew the folly of attempting to teach to the world that which was neither ready nor willing to receive. And the spirit of persecution has not as yet died out in the land. There are certain Hermetic teachings which, if publicly promulgated, would bring down upon the teachers a great cry of scorn, revilement from the multitude, who would again raise the cry of, "Crucify, crucify." In this little work, we have endeavored to give you an idea of the fundamental teachings of the Kybalion, striving to give you the working principles, rather than attempting to work out the teaching in detail. If you're a true student, you will be able to work out and apply these principles. If not, then you must develop yourself into one. For otherwise the Hermetic teachings will be as words, words, words. The Hermetic philosophy. The lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. The Kybalion. Egypt, the home of the pyramids and the Sphinx, was the birthplace of the hidden wisdom and mystic teachings. India, Persia, Chaldea, Media, China, Japan, Assyria, ancient Greece, and Rome, and other ancient countries also partook liberally of the feast of knowledge which the hierophants and masters of the land of Isis so freely provided for those who came prepared to partake of the great store of mystic and esoteric lore. All students of the esoteric recognize the debt that they owe to these venerable masters of that ancient land. But among these great masters of ancient Egypt, there once dwelt one whom the masters hailed as the Master of Masters. This man, if a man he indeed was, dwelt in Egypt in the earliest days. He was known as Hermes Trismegistus. He was the father of the esoteric wisdom, the founder of astrology, and the discoverer of alchemy. The details of his life story are lost to history owing to the lapse of the years. Ancient countries disputed with each other, each wanting to claim the honor of being his birthplace. And this thousands of years ago. The date of his sojourn in Egypt seems to be in the early days of the oldest dynasties of Egypt, long before the days of Moses. The best authorities regard him as a contemporary of Abraham, and some of the Jewish traditions go so far as to claim that Abraham acquired a portion of his mystic knowledge from Hermes himself. The Egyptians deified Hermes and made him one of their gods under the name of Thoth. In ancient Greece, he was called Mercury, the wing-footed god of wisdom. The Egyptians revered his memory for many centuries, yes, tens of centuries, calling him the scribe of the gods, and bestowing upon him distinctively his ancient title, Trismegistus, which means the thrice great. In all the ancient lands, the name Hermes was revered, the name being synonymous with the fount of wisdom. Even to this day, we use the term Hermetic, meaning secret or sealed. And this policy of careful dissemination of the truth has always been characterized by the Hermeticists. The Hermetic teachings are to be found in all lands, among all religions, but never identified with any particular country, nor with any particular religion. This because of the warning of the ancient teachers against allowing the secret doctrine to become crystallized into a creed. The wisdom of this caution is apparent to all students of history. The ancient esotericism of India and Persia degenerated and was largely lost, owing to the fact that the teachers became priests and so mixed theology with philosophy. The result being that the esotericism of India and Persia has been gradually lost amidst the massive religious superstition, cults, creeds, and gods. So it was with ancient Greece and Rome. So it was with the Hermetic teachings of the Gnostics and the early Christians, which were lost at the time of Constantine, whose iron hand smothered philosophy with a blanket of theology, losing to the Christian Church that which was its very essence and spirit, and causing it to grope throughout several centuries before it found its way back to its ancient faith. The Church is now struggling to get back to its ancient mystic teachings. But there were always a few faithful souls who kept alive the flame, tending it carefully and not allowing its light to become extinguished. And thanks to these staunch hearts and fearless minds, we have the truth still with us. But it's not found in books to any great extent. It has been passed along from master to student, from initiate to hierophant, from lip to ear. When it was written down at all, its meaning was veiled in terms of alchemy and astrology, so that only those possessing the key could read it right. This was made necessary in order to avoid the persecutions of theologians of the Middle Ages, who fought the secret doctrine with fire and sword, stake, gibbet, and cross. Even to this day, there can be found but a few reliable books on the Hermetic philosophy, although there are countless references to it in many books written in various phases of esotericism. For instance, the Emerald Tablets and the Divine Pymander. And yet the Hermetic philosophy is the only master key to the esoteric teachings. In the early days, there was a compilation of certain basic Hermetic doctrines passed on from teacher to student, which was known as the Kybalion. The exact significance and meaning of the term having been lost for several centuries. This teaching, however, is known to many to whom it has descended from mouth to ear, on and on throughout the centuries. Its precepts have never been written down nor even printed so far as we know. It was merely a collection of maxims, axioms, and precepts which were non-understandable to outsiders, but which were readily understood by the students. These teachings really constituted the basic principles of the art of Hermetic alchemy, which, contrary to the general belief, dealt in the mastery of mental forces rather than material elements, the transmutation of one kind of mental vibration into others, instead of the changing of one kind of metal into another. The legends of the Philosopher's Stone, which would turn base metal into gold, was an allegory relating to Hermetic philosophy, readily understood by all students of true Hermeticism. We herein give you many of the maxims, axioms, and precepts of the Kybalion, accompanied by explanations and illustrations, which we deem likely to render the teachings more easily comprehended, particularly as the original text is purposely veiled in obscure terms. In the words of the Kybalion, when the ears of the student are ready to hear, then cometh the lips to fill them with wisdom. Where fall the footsteps of the Master, the ears of those ready for his teaching open wide. The Kybalion. And likewise, when the pupil is ready to receive the truth, then will this little book come to him or her. Such is the law, the Hermetic principle of cause and effect, and in its aspect, the law of attraction will bring lips and ear, pupil and book together. Chapter 2. The 7 Hermetic Principles. The principles of truth are 7. He who knows these understandably possesses the magic key, before whose touch all the doors of the temple fly open. The Kybalion. The 7 Hermetic principles upon which the entire Hermetic philosophy are based are as follows: the Principle of Mentalism, the Principle of Correspondence, the Principle of Vibration, the Principle of Polarity, the Principle of Rhythm, the Principle of Cause and Effect, and the Principle of Gender. Now let's briefly summarize. Number 1, the Principle of Mentalism. The all is mind. The universe is mental. This principle explains that there is a reality behind the unreal world of forms and appearances. To many, this is known as spirit, which in itself is unknowable and undefinable, but which may be considered and thought of as universal, infinite, living, loving mind. It also explains that all the phenomenal world or universe is simply a mental creation of the all, in which mind we live, move, and have our being. An understanding of this great Hermetic principle of mentalism enables the individual to readily grasp the laws of the mental universe and to apply the same to his well-being and advancement. One of the old Hermetic masters wrote long ages ago, "He who grasps the truth of the mental nature of the universe is well advanced on the path of mastery." And these words are as true today as the time they were first written. Without this master key, mastery is impossible, and the student knocks in vain at the many doors of the temple. Number 2, the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. The Kybalion. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and phenomenon of the various planes and beings in life, and the grasping of this principle gives one the means of solving many a dark paradox and hidden secret of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence to them, we're able to understand much that would otherwise simply be unknowable. This principle is of universal application and manifestation on the various planes of the material, mental, and spiritual universe. The ancient Hermetists considered this principle as one of the most important mental instruments. Just as a knowledge of the principles of geometry enable man to measure distant suns and their movements, so a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables us to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. In studying the individual, the monad, one may understand the archangel. Number 3, the principle of vibration. Nothing rests. Everything moves, everything vibrates. The Kybalion. This principle explains that the differences between different manifestations of matter, energy, mind, and even spirit result largely from the varying rates of vibration. From the all, which is pure spirit, down to the grossest form of matter, everything vibrates. The higher the vibration, the higher position in the scale. The vibration of spirit is at such an infinite rate of intensity and rapidity that it is practically at rest, just as a rapidly moving wheel seems to be motionless. And at the other end of the scale, there are gross forms of matter whose vibrations are so low that they also seem to be at rest. Between these poles, there are millions upon millions of varying degrees of vibration. From electron, atom, and molecule, to entire worlds and galaxies, everything is in vibratory motion. This is also true in the higher planes of energy on the mental and spiritual planes. An understanding of this principle enables Hermetic seekers to control their own mental vibrations and those of others as well. Number 4, the principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The Kybalion. This principle explains the old paradoxes that have perplexed so many. Opposites are the same, differing only in degree. All opposites may be reconciled. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything, etc. It explains that in everything there are two poles, or two opposite aspects, and that opposites are really only the two extremes of the same thing, with many varying degrees between them. To illustrate, heat and cold, although opposites, are really the same thing. Look at your thermometer and see if you can discover where heat terminates and cold begins. There is no such thing as absolute heat or absolute cold. The two terms heat and cold simply indicate varying degrees of the same thing. And that same thing which manifests as heat and cold is merely a form, variety, and rate of vibration. The same principle manifests in the case of light and darkness, which are the same thing. The difference consisting of varying degrees between the two poles of the phenomena. Where does darkness leave off and light begin? What is the difference between large and small, between hard and soft, between black and white, between positive and negative? The principle of polarity explains these paradoxes, and no other principle can supersede it. The same principle operates on the mental level. Let us take a radical and extreme example, that of love and hate. Two mental states apparently totally different, and yet they are degrees of hate and degrees of love, and the middle point in which we use the terms like or dislike, which shade into each other so gradually that sometimes we're at a loss to know whether we like or dislike or neither. And more than this, and considered of more importance by Hermetists, it is possible to change the vibrations of hate to the vibrations of love in one's own mind and in the minds of others. Many of you have had personal experiences of the involuntary rapid transition from love to hate and the reverse, and you will therefore realize the possibility of this being accomplished by the use of will. Good and evil are but poles of the same thing, and the Hermetist understands the art of transmuting evil into good by means of an application of the principle of polarity. In short, the art of polarization is alchemy, known and practiced by ancient and modern masters alike. Number 5. The principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The Kybalion. This principle embodies the truth that everything is in measured motion. To and fro goes the way, a flow and inflow, a swing backward and forward, a pendulum-like movement, a high tide and low tide. Between the two poles which exist in accordance with the principle of polarity described a moment ago, there is always an action and reaction, an advance and retreat, a rising and sinking. This is in every aspect of the universe. Galaxies, worlds, suns, men, animals, mind, energy, and matter. This law is manifest in the creation and destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the life of all things, and finally, the mental states of man. The Hermetists have grasped this principle, finding its universal application, and have also discovered certain means to overcome its effects in themselves. They apply the mental law of neutralization. They cannot annul the principle or cause it to cease its operation, but they've learned how to escape its effect depending upon the mastery of the principle. They have learned how to use it instead of being used by it. The master of Hermetics polarizes himself at the point at which he desires to rest, and then neutralizes the rhythmic swing of the pendulum which would tend to carry him to the other side. All individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery do this to a certain degree, more or less unconsciously. But the master does this consciously, and by use of his will, attains a degree of poise and mental firmness almost impossible of belief on the part of the masses who were swung backward and forward like a pendulum. Number 6, the principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect, and every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not yet recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. The Kybalion. Nothing ever merely happens. There is no such thing as chance. The higher planes do dominate the lower planes, but regardless, still nothing ever entirely escapes the law. The Hermetists understand the art and methods of rising above the ordinary plane of cause and effect, and by mentally rising to a higher plane where they can become cause instead of an effect. The masses are just carried along, obedient to their environment, the wills and desires of others stronger than themselves. But the masters, rising to the plane above, dominate their moods, characters, qualities, and powers as well as the environment surrounding them, and becoming movers instead of pawns, masters instead of victims. They help to play the game of life instead of being played and moved about by other wills and environment. They use the principle instead of being its tools. The masters obey the causation of the higher planes, but they rule on their own plane. In this statement, there is condensed a wealth of Hermetic knowledge. Number 7, the principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. The Kybalion. The masculine and feminine principles ever at work. This is true not only of the physical plane, but of the mental and even the spiritual planes. On the physical plane, the principle manifests as sex. On the higher planes, it takes higher forms, but the principle is ever the same. No creation, physical, mental, or spiritual, is possible without the gender principle. An understanding of its laws will throw light on many problems plaguing humanity. The principle of gender is simply about generation, regeneration, and creation on every plane. Everything and every person contains the two elements within him or her. Every male has a female element, and every female contains the male. If you would understand the philosophy of mental and spiritual creation, generation, and regeneration, you must understand and study this Hermetic principle. It contains the solution of many mysteries of life. We caution that this principle has no reference to the lustful and degrading teachings and practices taught under fanciful tantric titles like phallicism. Debasement of the great natural principle of gender tend to ruin the mind, body, and soul, and the Hermetic philosophy has ever sounded the warning against them. And the Hermetic philosophy has ever sounded the warning note against these degraded teachings. They are a perversion of nature's principle of regeneration. Finally, to the pure, all things are pure. To the base, all things are base. Chapter 3. Mental Transmutation. Mind, as well as metals and elements, may be transmuted from state to state, degree to degree, condition to condition, pole to pole, vibration to vibration. True Hermetic transmutation is a mental art, the Kybalion. As stated earlier, the Hermetists were the original alchemists, astrologers, and psychologists, and Hermes was the founder of these schools of thought. From astrology has grown modern astronomy. From alchemy has grown modern chemistry. From mystic psychology has grown modern behaviorism. The records engraved on the stones of ancient Egypt show conclusively that the ancients had a full, comprehensive knowledge of astronomy. The very building of the pyramids shows the connection between their design and the study of astronomical science. Nor were they ignorant of chemistry, for the fragments of the ancient writings show that they were acquainted with the chemical properties of things. In fact, the ancient theories regarding physics are being slowly verified by the latest discoveries of modern science, most notably the makeup of physical matter. Nor must it be supposed that they were ignorant of the so-called modern discoveries in psychology. On the contrary, the Egyptians were especially skilled in the science of psychology, particularly in the branches that modern schools ignore, but which nevertheless are being uncovered under the name of psychic science and telepathy. The truth is that beneath the material chemistry, astronomy, and psychology, that is, the psychology in its phase of brain action, the ancients possessed a knowledge of transcendental astronomy called astrology, of transcendental chemistry called alchemy. They possessed the inner knowledge as well as the outer knowledge, the latter alone being under the purview of modern materialistic science. Among the many secret branches of knowledge possessed by the Hermetists was mental transmutation, which forms the subject matter of this lesson. Transmutation is a term usually employed to designate the ancient art of the transmutation of metals, particularly of the base metals, into gold. The word transmute means to change from one nature, form, or substance to another, to transform. And accordingly, mental transmutation means the art of changing and transforming mental states, so you may see that mental transmutation is the art of mental chemistry. But this means far more than appears on the surface. Transmutation, alchemy, or chemistry on the mental plane is important enough in its effects to be sure, and if the art stopped there, it would still be one of the most important branches of study known to man. But this is only the beginning. Let us see why. The first of the 7 Hermetic principles is the principle of mentalism, the axiom of which is, the all is mind, the universe is mental. The universe is thought forms in the mind of the all. If the universe is mental in its nature, then mental transformation must be the art of changing the universe physically along the lines of mentalism. So you see, therefore, that mental transmutation is really the magic of which the ancient writers had so much to say in their mystical works, and about which they gave so few practical instructions. If all be mental, then the art which enables one to transmute mental conditions must render the master the controller of material conditions as well. As a matter of fact, none but advanced mental alchemists have been able to attain the degree of power necessary to control the grosser physical conditions, such as the control of the elements of nature, the production or cessation of tempests, the production and cessation of earthquakes and other physical phenomena. But that such men have existed and do exist today are well known by esoterics of all disciplines. These masters don't make a public exhibition of their powers, but seek seclusion from the crowds of men in order to better work their way along the path of attainment. We mention their existence at this point merely to call your attention to the fact that their power is entirely mental. But students and Hermetists of lesser degree than masters, the initiates and teachers, are able to freely work along the mental plane in mental transmutation. In fact, what we call psychic phenomena and mental telepathy operates along the same general lines, for there is but one principle involved, regardless of what it is called. The majority of modern practitioners are quite ignorant compared to the ancient masters, for they lack the fundamental knowledge upon which the work is based. Most of their transmutation is done unconsciously. But even modern mental scientists know every material condition may be changed or transmuted by the earnest desire and will of a person desiring changed conditions of life. These various forms of practice can be used for either good or evil, according to the Hermetic principles of polarity. So let's now look deeper into the first of the Hermetic principles, the principle of mentalism, in which is explained in the words of the Kybalion, the all is mind, the universe is mental. Seekers should study this principle carefully, for it is really the basic principle of the whole Hermetic philosophy of mental transmutation. Chapter 4. The All. Under and back of the universe of time, space, and change is ever to be found the substantial reality, the fundamental truth, the Kybalion. Substantial means reality, or a state of being real, permanent, and actual. Under and behind all outward physical appearances, there must always be a substantial reality. This is the law. Man, considering the physical universe, sees nothing but change, not only materially, but in mental states. He sees nothing that really is, but everything changing. Nothing stands still. Everything is being born, growing, and dying. The very instant a thing reaches its height, it begins to decline. The law of rhythm is in constant operation. There is no reality, enduring quality, or substantiality in anything. Nothing is permanent but change. He sees all things evolving from other things and resolving into other things. Constant action and reaction. Nothing endures but change. But if he is a thinking person, he must realize that all of these changing things must be but outward appearances of some underlying, unchanging, substantial reality. All thinkers in all lands and in all times have acknowledged the existence of this substantial reality. People have given it many names. Some have called it God, eternal energy. Regardless, the Master has shown us truth is self-evident and it needs no argument. As we have stated, the Hermetists call this underlying power the All, which we consider to be the most accurate among the many terms applied, that which can't be named nor understood. The inner nature of the All is unknowable. This must be so, since only the All itself could comprehend itself. Hermetists regard all theories, guesses, and speculations of the theologians and metaphysicians regarding the inner nature of the All as but the childish efforts of mortal minds to grasp the secret of the infinite. One pursuing such inquiries travels around and around in a labyrinth of thought, like the squirrel frantically running around and around the wheel in his cage, traveling forever and yet reaching nowhere. A prisoner ending up just where he started. The closest words that we can find to describe it is mind. Harmonious, living, loving mind. The mind of the All. And even more presumptuous are those who attempt to ascribe to the All the personality and characteristics of themselves, projecting their own human emotions and characteristics even down to their pettiest qualities, such as jealousy, susceptibility to flattery, the desire for offerings. Such ideas are not worthy of grown men and women, and are rapidly being discarded by those who know. But while the essential nature of the All is unknowable, there are certain truths connected with his existence. but the report of reason must be hospitably received and treated with respect. The Kybalion. Human reason we must accept, so long as we think at all. The all must be all that really is. There can be nothing existing outside the all. Otherwise, the all would not be the all. The all must be infinite, because there is nothing else to define, limit, or restrict the all. It must be infinite in time, or eternal. It must have always existed, for there is nothing else that could have created it. And something can never evolve from nothing. And if it had ever not been, even for a moment, it would not be now. It must continuously exist forever, for there is nothing to destroy it. And it can never not be, not even for a moment. It must be infinite in space. It must be everywhere, for there is no place outside of the all. It cannot be otherwise. It must be infinite in power, or absolute, for there is nothing to limit, restrict, restrain, confine, disturb, or condition it. It is subject to no other power, for there is no other power. The all must be immutable, or not subject to change in its real nature, for there is nothing to work changes upon it, nothing into which it could change, nor from which it could have changed. It cannot be added to nor subtracted from, increased nor diminished, nor become greater or lesser in any respect whatsoever. It must have always been, and must always remain, just what it is now, the all. And as there is nothing outside of the all, in reality then, any and all such finite things must be as nothing. Now don't become befogged. There is reconciliation of this apparently contradictory state of affairs. We see around us that which is called matter, which forms the physical foundation of all forms. Is the all merely matter? Not at all. Matter can't manifest life or mind, and as life and mind are manifested in the universe, the all cannot be matter, for nothing rises higher than its own source. Even modern science now admits there's really no such thing as matter. Just energy trapped inside orbiting electrons. And orbiting electrons create vibrations. So in essence, matter is just energy vibrating at a lower rate of vibration. Does this mean the all is mere energy? Well, not energy as the materialists use the term. Energy as they see it is blind, mechanical, and devoid of life or mind. Life and mind can never evolve from blind energy or force, for the reason given a moment ago. Nothing can rise higher than its own source. Nothing can evolve unless it is also involved. Nothing manifests in effect unless it is also the cause. So the all cannot be mere energy nor force, for if it were, then there would be no such thing as life and mind. And we know better than that, for we're alive and using mind to consider this very question. What is there then higher than matter or energy in the universe? Life and mind. Life and mind in all their varying degrees of unfoldment. So then, the all is life and mind? The answer is living mind, which is another term for spirit. The all is infinite living mind, and the illumined call it spirit. Chapter 5. The Mental Universe. The universe is mental, being held in the mind of the all, the Kybalion. The all is spirit. But what is spirit? This question can't accurately be answered, for the same reason that the all can't be explained or defined. Spirit is simply a name that men give to our highest conception of infinite living mind. Spirit transcends our understanding, and we use the term merely that we may think or speak of the all. For the purposes of thought and understanding, we are justified in thinking of spirit as infinite living mind, at the same time acknowledging that we cannot fully understand it. We must either do this or stop thinking of the matter at all. Let us now proceed to a consideration of the nature of the universe. What is the universe? Is the universe the all? No, this can't be, because the universe seems to be made up of many and is constantly changing. There are other ways it does not measure up to the all, which was covered in the last chapter. Then if the material universe is not the all, it must be nothing. Such is the inevitable conclusion of the mind at first thought. But this will not satisfy the question. We know the universe exists. Then, if the universe is neither the all nor nothing, what can it be? Let's examine the question. Some philosophers have answered the question by saying the all created the universe from itself. That is, from the being and substance of the all. But the all can't be subtracted from, nor divided, as we have seen. And if it was true, then wouldn't each particle of the universe be aware of its being the all? Indeed, some have jumped to the conclusion that they and the all are identical. So they fill the air with shouts of, "I am God," to the amusement of the multitude and the sorrow of the sages. The claim of a molecule that "I am man" would be modest in comparison. If the universe isn't the all, what is it? Is it the all having separated itself into fragments? Of what else could it be made? This is the great question. Let's refer to the Principle of Correspondence and the as above, so below. Let's get a glimpse of the workings on higher planes by examining those of our own. On his own plane of being, how does man create? Well, first he may create by making something out of outside materials. But this will not do, for there are no materials outside of the all. Well then, secondly, man procreates or reproduces his kind by the process of begetting, which is self-multiplication accomplished by transferring a portion of his substance to his offspring. But the all cannot transfer or subtract a portion of itself, nor can it reproduce or multiply itself in the first place. That would imply an addition or subtraction, which is also absurd. Is there a third way in which man creates? Yes, he creates mentally, and in so doing, he uses no outside materials, nor does he reproduce himself, yet his spirit pervades his mental creation. Following the principle of correspondence, we're justified in considering that the all creates the universe the same way. The all can create in no other way except mentally, without using either material, and there is none to use, or reproducing itself, which is also impossible. There is no escape from this conclusion of reason. Just as you create a universe of your own in your mind, so does the all create universes in its own mentality. But your universe is the mental creation of a finite mind, whereas that of the all is the creation of an infinite mind. The two are similar in kind, but infinitely different in degree. The all creates in its infinite mind countless universes, which exist for aeons of time. And yet, to the all, the creation, development, decline, and death of a million universes is as the time of the twinkling of an eye, the Kybalion. The infinite mind of the all is the womb of universes, the Kybalion. The principle of gender, as stated in Chapter 1, is manifested on all planes of life, material, mental, and spiritual. But as we stated, gender does not mean sex. Sex is merely a material manifestation of the gender principle. Gender means relating to generation or creation. And whenever anything is generated or created on any plane, the principle of gender must be manifested. And this is true even in the creation of universes. Now don't jump to the conclusion that we're teaching that there is a male and female God or creator. That idea is a distortion of the ancient teachings on the subject. That teaching is that the all in itself is one, and it's above gender, just as it is above all other laws, including time and space. This is the law from which all other laws proceed, and it's not subject to them. But when the all manifests on a plane of generation or creation, then it acts according to its own law and principle, for it is moving on a lower plane of being. Consequently, it manifests gender in its masculine and feminine aspects, on the mental plane, of course. This idea may seem startling to some who hear it at first, but you've already passively accepted it in your everyday conceptions anyway. You speak of the fatherhood of God and the motherhood of nature, of God the divine Father, and nature the universal mother. You have instinctively acknowledged the principle of gender in the universe, Isn't that so? But the Hermetic teaching doesn't imply a real duality. The all is one. The two aspects are merely aspects of manifestation. The teaching is that the masculine principle manifested by the all in a way stands apart from the actual mental creation of the universe. It then projects its will toward the feminine principle, which we may call nature. Then nature begins the actual work of the evolution of the universe, from simple atoms on up to man, then on up to still higher, all according to well-established laws of nature. This is more than a mere poetic figure of speech. It is an idea of the actual process of the creation of the universe. But always remember that the all is one, and that in its infinite one mind, the universe is generated, created, and exists. It may help you to get the proper idea if you'll apply the law of correspondence to yourself and in your own mind. You know that part of you that is the I, in a sense, stands apart and witnesses the creation of your mental images in your own mind. That part of your mind in which the mental images are generated may be called the me, in distinction from your I. The I standing apart and witnessing and examining the thoughts, ideas, and images of the me. As above, so below. Remember, and the phenomenon of one plane may be employed to solve the riddles of the higher or lower planes. Is it any wonder that you, the child, feel that instinctive reverence for the all? This we call religion. With that respect and reverence we have for the Father Mind, is it any wonder that when we consider the works and wonders of nature, we're overcome with a mighty feeling which has its roots way down in our innermost being? That's the Mother Mind that we're pressing close up to, like a babe to the breast. You don't make the mistake of supposing that the little world you see around you, the earth, which is a mere grain of dust in the universe, is the universe itself. There are millions upon millions of such worlds, and greater. There are millions and millions of such universes in existence within the infinite mind of the all. And even in our little solar system, there are regions and planes of life far higher than ours, and beings compared to which we earthbound mortals are as slimy life forms on the ocean's bed when compared to man. There are beings with powers and attributes higher than man has ever dreamed of the gods possessing. And yet these beings were once as you, and still lower. And you will be even as they, and still higher in time. For such is the destiny of man, as reported by the illumined. And death? Well, death is not real, even in the relative sense. It is but birth to a new life, and you shall go on and on to higher and still higher planes of life for aeons upon aeons of time. The universe is your home, and you shall explore its farthest recesses before the end of time. You are dwelling in the infinite mind of the all, and your possibilities and opportunities are infinite, both in time and space. And at the end of the grand cycle of aeons, when the all shall draw back into itself all of its creations, you'll go gladly, for you will then know the whole truth of being one with the all. Such is the report of the illumined, those who have advanced well along the path. And in the meantime, rest calm and serene. You are safe and protected by the infinite power of the Father-Mother mind. Within the Father-Mother mind, mortal children are at home. The Kybalion. There is not one who is fatherless nor motherless in the universe. The Kybalion. Chapter 6. The Divine Paradox. The half-wise, recognizing the comparative unreality of the universe, imagine that they may defy its laws, and they are broken against the rocks and torn asunder. The truly wise, knowing the nature of the universe, use law against laws, the higher against the lower, and by the art of alchemy transmute that which is undesirable into that which is worthy. Mastery consists not in abnormal dreams, visions, and fantastic imaginings or living, but in using the higher forces against the lower, escaping the pains of the lower planes by vibrating on the higher. Transmutation, not presumptuous denial, is the weapon of the master. The Kybalion. This is the paradox of the universe, resulting from the principle of polarity, which manifests when the all begins to create. Hearken to it, for it points to the difference between half-wisdom and wisdom. The universe is a dream, but must be treated as real, and life must be based accordingly. Although with an ever understanding of the higher truth, each according to its own plane and laws. Were the all to imagine that the universe were indeed real, there would be no escape from the lower to the higher divine. Then would the universe become a fixity, and progress would become impossible. Likewise, if man, owing to half-wisdom, acts and lives like the universe is merely a dream, akin to his own finite dreams, then indeed it becomes so for him, and like a sleepwalker he stumbles ever around and around in a circle, making no progress, and being forced into awakening by falling bruised and bleeding over the natural laws that he ignored. Keep your mind ever on the star, but let your eyes watch over your footsteps, lest you fall into a mire by reason of your upward gaze. Remember the divine paradox, that while the universe is not, it still is. Remember ever the two poles of truth, the absolute and relative. Beware of half-truths. What Hermetists know as the law of paradox is an aspect of the principle of polarity. Hermetic writings are filled with references to paradox in consideration of the problems of life and being. The teachers are constantly warning their students against the error of omitting the other side of any question, and their warnings are particularly directed to the problems of the absolute and the relative. These perplex all seekers of philosophy and cause many to think and act contrary to what is generally known as common sense. The first thought that comes to the thinking person after realizing that the universe is a mental creation of the all, is that the universe and all that it contains is a mere illusion, an unreality. Against this idea, his instincts revolt, but this, like all other great truths, must be considered both from the absolute and the relative viewpoint. From the absolute point of view, of course, the universe is an illusion, a dream, as compared to the all in itself. We recognize that we speak of the world as a fleeting show that comes and goes, and is born and dies because it must ever be connected with the idea of a created universe, when it is contrasted with the idea of the all. So the Hermetic teachings do not preach the unsubstantiality of the universe in any stronger terms than those more familiar to you. Anything that has a beginning and an ending must be, in a sense, unreal and untrue. And the universe comes under that rule in all schools of thought. From the absolute point of view, there is nothing real except the all, no matter what terms we may use in thinking or discussing the subject. Absolute truth has been defined as things as the mind of God knows them, while relative truth is things the highest reason of man can understand. We must not make the mistake of ignoring or denying the facts and phenomena of the universe as they present themselves to our mortal faculties. We are not the all, remember. To take a familiar illustration, we all recognize that matter exists to our senses, and will fare badly if we don't. And yet, even our finite minds understand the scientific dictum that there's no such thing as matter from a scientific point of view. That which we call matter is held to be merely an aggregation of atoms, which atoms themselves are merely a grouping of units of force called electrons or ions, vibrating and in constant circular motion. We kick a stone and we feel the impact. It seems to be real, notwithstanding that we know it to be merely space, as we have stated above. But remember, our foot, which feels the impact by means of our brains, is likewise electrons, and for that matter, so are our brains. And at best, if it were not by reason of our mind, we would not know the foot nor stone at all. Then again, the ideal of the artist or sculptor, while reproducing in stone or on canvas, seemed very real to him. So do the characters in the mind of the author or dramatist, which he seeks to express so others may recognize them. And if this be true in the case of our finite minds, what must be the degree of reality in the mental images created in the mind of the infinite? Friends, to mortals, this universe of mentality is very real indeed, and it is the only one that we can ever know, though we rise from plane to plane, higher and higher within it. To know it otherwise, we must be the all itself. It is true that the higher we rise in the scale, and the nearer to the mind of the Father we reach, the more apparent becomes the illusory nature of finite things. But not until the all finally withdraws us into itself does the vision actually vanish. So we need not dwell upon the feature of illusion. Rather, let us recognize the real nature of the universe, seek to understand its mental laws, and endeavor to use them to the best effect in our upward progress through life. as we travel from plane to plane of being. The laws of the universe are nonetheless iron laws, and all but the all are bound by them. Again, don't feel insecure or afraid. We're all held firmly in the infinite mind of the all, and there's nothing for us to fear. There's no power outside of the all to affect us. So we may rest calm and secure. Then calm and peaceful we sleep, rocked in the cradle of the deep, resting safely on the bosom of the oceanic infinity of mind. The most advanced masters acquire powers usually attributed to the gods. There are countless ranks of being in the great hierarchy of life, whose being and power transcends even that of the highest masters among men to a degree unthinkable by mortals. But even the highest master and the highest being must bow to the law. So if even these highest beings, whose powers even exceed those attributed to gods, and even if these are bound by and are subservient to law, then imagine the presumption of those of our race and grade who dare consider the laws of nature as unreal, because he happens to be able to grasp the truth that the laws are mental in nature and simply mental creations of the all. So the seeker of Hermetics need not lay aside any of his cherished scientific views regarding the universe. All he is asked to do is to grasp the underlying principle of the all as being mind. The universe is mental, held in the mind of the all. He'll find the other 6 principles fit nicely into his scientific knowledge, and will serve to bring about obscure points and throw light into dark corners. This is not to be wondered at when we realize the influence of Hermetic thought of early philosophers of Greece and Egypt, upon whose foundations of thought the theories of modern science largely rest. The acceptance of the first principle of mentalism is the only great point of difference between modern science and Hermetic philosophy. Science is gradually moving toward the Hermetic position in its groping in the dark for a way out of the labyrinth into which it has wandered in its search for reality. The purpose of this lesson is to impress upon the minds of our seekers the fact that, to all intents and purposes, the universe and its laws are just as real, so far as man is concerned, as they would be under the hypothesis of materialism. Follow the example of the wise, who use law against laws, the higher against the lower, and by art of alchemy transmute that which is undesirable into that which is worthy. Let's avoid the half-wisdom which ignores the truth that mastery consists not in abnormal dreams, visions, and fantastic imaginings, but in using the higher forces against the lower, escaping the pains of the lower by vibrating on the higher. Remember always, seeker, that transmutation, not presumptuous denial, is the weapon of the master. The true meaning of life is not known to men on this plane, if indeed any, but the highest authorities and our own intuitions teach us that we will make no mistake in living up to the best that is in us so far as is possible. We're all on the path, and the road leads upward forever with frequent resting places. Chapter 7. the all in all. While all is in the all, it's equally true that the all is in all. To him who truly understands this truth hath come to great knowledge, the Kybalion. This apparently contradictory statement is reconcilable under the law of paradox. It is moreover an exact Hermetic statement of the relations existing between the all and its mental created universe. We've already seen how all is in the all. Now let's examine the other pole of the subject. How can the all be in all? The Hermetic teachings are that the all is not only transcendent, it is immanent, meaning inherent or abiding within every part, particle, unit, or combination within the universe. Form a mental image of something, a person, an idea, something having a mental form. A favorite example being that of the author or dramatist forming an idea of his characters, or a painter or sculptor forming an image of an idea that he wishes to express in his art. This image has existence and being solely within his own mind, yet he, the seeker, author, dramatist, painter, or sculptor, is in a sense immanent in or abiding within the mental image also. In other words, the entire virtue, life, and spirit in the mental image is derived from the immanent mind of the thinker. Take a relatively modern example like, say, Hamlet or Richard III, existing totally in the mind of Shakespeare at the time of their creation. And yet Shakespeare also existed within each of these characters, giving them their vitality, spirit, and action. He who creates the spirit of the characters that we know as Oliver Twist or Uriah Heep, is it Dickens? Or do each of these characters have a personal spirit independent of their creator? Does the Sistine Madonna or the Mona Lisa have a reality of their own? Or do they represent the spiritual and mental power of their creators? The law of paradox, that both propositions are true, viewed from proper viewpoints, macabre is both macabre and yet Dickens. And again, while macabre may be said to be Dickens, Dickens is not identical with macabre. Men like macabre may exclaim, "The spirit of my creator is inherent within me, and yet I am not he." How different this is from the shocking half-truth so vociferously announced by certain of the half-wise who fill the air with their raucous cries of, "I am God." Imagine poor macabre or sneaky Uriah Heep crying, "I am Dickens," or some of the lowly clods in one of Shakespeare's plays eloquently announcing that, "I am Shakespeare." The all is in the earthworm, and yet the earthworm is far from being the all. Yet the all is immanent in the earthworm, and in the particles that go to make up the earthworm. Can there be any greater mystery than this, of all being in the all, and the all being in all? These illustrations are necessarily imperfect and inadequate, for they represent the creation of mental images in finite minds, while the universe is a creation of an infinite mind. Yet the difference between them is still simply a matter of degree. In the degree that a man realizes the existence of the indwelling spirit immanent within his being, so will he rise to the spiritual scale of life. This is what spiritual development means: the recognition, realization, and manifestation of the spirit within us. This is true spiritual development, and it contains the truth of true religion. There are many planes of being, many subplanes of life, many degrees of existence in the universe, and all depend upon the advancement of beings in the scale, of which scale the lowest point is the grossest matter, and the highest point separated only by the thinnest division from the spirit of the all. Upward and onward along the scale of life, everything is moving. All are on the path whose end is the all. All progress is returning home. All is upward and onward, in spite of all seemingly contradictory appearances. Such is the message of the illumined. The Hermetic teachings concerning the process of mental creation in the universe are that at the beginning of the creative cycle, the all in its aspect of being projects its will towards the aspect of becoming, and the process of creation begins. It is taught that the process consists of lowering the vibration until a very low degree of vibratory energy is reached, in which point the grossest possible form of matter is manifested. This process is called the stage of involution, in which the all becomes involved or wrapped up in its creation. This process is believed by the Hermetists to have a correspondence to the mental process of an artist, writer, or inventor who becomes so wrapped up in his mental creation as to almost forget his own existence, and who, for the time being, almost lives in his creation. This involuntary stage of creation is sometimes called the outpouring of divine energy, just as the evolutionary stage is called the indrawing. The extreme pole of the creative process is considered to be the furthest removal from the all, while the beginning of the evolutionary stage is regarded as the beginning of the return swing of the pendulum of rhythm. A coming home idea being held in all of the Hermetic teachings. The teachings are that during the outpouring, the vibrations become lower and lower until finally the urge ceases and the return swing begins. But there is this difference, that while in the outpouring the creative forces manifest compactly and as a whole, yet from the beginning of the evolutionary or indrawing stage, everything is individualizing. That is, the tendency to separate into units of force, so that finally that which left the all as unindividualized energy returns to its source as countless highly developed units of life, having risen higher and higher in the scale by means of physical, mental, and spiritual evolution. The Hermetic teachings regarding the process of evolution are that the all, having meditated upon the beginning of creation, having thus established the material foundations of the universe, having thought it into existence, then gradually awakens or rouses from its meditation, and in so doing starts into manifestation the process of evolution. Thus the upward movement begins, and all begins to move spiritward. Matter becomes less gross, the units spring into being, the combinations begin to form. Life appears and manifests in higher and higher forms, and mind becomes more and more in evidence. The vibrations constantly becoming higher. In short, the entire process of evolution in all of its phases begins and proceeds according to the established laws of the indrawing process. All of this occupies eons upon eons of man's time, each eon containing countless millions of years. But yet the illumined inform us that the entire creation, including involution and evolution, is but in the twinkle of an eye to the all. At the end of countless cycles of eons of time, the all withdraws its attention, its contemplation and meditation of the universe, for the great work is finished, and all is withdrawn into the all from which it emerged. But mystery of mysteries, the spirit of each soul is not annihilated, but is infinitely expanded. The created and creator are merged. Such is the report of the illumined. The above illustration of the meditation and subsequent awakening from meditation of the all is of course but an attempt of the teachers to describe the infinite process using a finite example. And yet, as below so above, the difference is merely in degree. And just as the all arouses itself from the meditation upon the universe, so does man, in time, cease from manifesting upon the material plane and withdraws himself more and more into the indwelling spirit, which is indeed the divine ego. Why does the all create universes? The question may be asked in different forms, but the above is the gist of the inquiry. Men have striven hard to answer this question, but still there is no answer worthy of the name. And yet the all does create and manifest, and seems to find some kind of satisfaction in so doing. And it is difficult to escape the conclusion that in some infinite degree it must have what would correspond to an inner nature or creative instinct. But still, we prefer to think of the all as acting entirely free from any influence, internal as well as external. Strictly speaking, there cannot be said to be any reason whatsoever for the all to act, for a reason implies a cause, and the all is above cause and effect, except when it wills to become a cause, at which time the principle is set into motion. So you see, the matter is unthinkable, just as the all is unknowable. Just as we say the all merely is, so we're compelled to say that the all acts because it acts. Legends have it that Hermes the Great, when asked this question by his advanced seekers, answered them by pressing his lips tightly together and saying not a word, indicating that there was no answer. But remember that whatever be the answer to this problem, if indeed there be an answer, the truth remains that while all is in the all, it is equally true that the all is in all. The teaching on this point is emphatic, and we may add the concluding words of the quotation. To him who truly understands this truth has come to great knowledge. Chapter 8. Planes of Correspondence. As above, so below. The Kybalion. The great second Hermetic principle embodies the truth that there is a harmony, agreement, and correspondence between the several planes of manifestation, life, and being. This truth is a truth because all that is included in the universe emanates from the same source. The same laws, principles, and characteristics apply to each unit. For the purpose of convenience of thought and study, the Hermetic philosophy considers that the universe may be divided into three great classes of phenomenon, known as the three great planes, namely the great physical plane, the great mental plane, and the great spiritual plane. These divisions are more or less artificial and arbitrary, for the truth is that all of the three divisions are but ascending degrees of the great scale of life, the lowest point of which is undifferentiated matter, and the highest point is that of spirit. Moreover, the different planes shade into each other, so that no hard and fast division may be made between the higher phenomena of the physical and the lower of the mental, or between the higher of the mental and the lower of the physical. In short, the three great planes may be regarded as three great groups or degrees of life's manifestation. The densest of these, the physical, comprised of height, width, and depth. Add to this the animating quality of time. This adds vibration or movement to the three-dimensional height, width, and depth. We now have animation. Everything vibrates. Nothing is at rest. From the highest manifestation to the lowest, everything and all things vibrate. Not only do they vibrate at different rates of motion, but as in different directions and in different manners and in different degrees. The higher the rate of vibration, the higher the plane, and the higher the manifestation of life occupying that plane. The three great planes are not actual divisions of the phenomena of the universe, but merely arbitrary terms used by Hermetists in order to aid in the thought and study. The atom of matter, the unit of force, the mind of man, and the being of the archangel are all but different degrees in one scale, and all fundamentally the same, the difference being solely a matter of degree or rate of vibration. Hermetists subdivide each of these three great planes into 7 minor planes. All these divisions being more or less arbitrary, shading into each other, and adopted merely for the convenience of scientific study and thought. The great physical plane and its 7 minor planes is that division of the universe including all that relates to physics or material things. It includes all forms of that which we call matter. But you must remember that the Hermetic philosophy does not recognize matter as a thing in itself, or as having separate existence, even in the mind of the all. Matter is but a form of energy folded back on itself, creating a low rate of vibration. We'll have more to say on this as the lessons proceed. The Hermetists classify matter under the head of energy, and give to it 3 of the 7 minor planes of the great physical plane. These 7 planes can be thought of this way. The first, the plane of matter A, then the plane of matter B, the plane of matter C, then the plane of ethereal substance, then the plane of energy A, the plane of energy B, and the plane of energy C. The plane of matter A comprises the forms of matter in the form of solids, liquids, and gases, as generally recognized by modern textbooks on physics. The plane of matter B comprises certain higher and more subtle forms of matter, of the existence of which modern science is but just now recognizing. The phenomena of radiant matter, in its phases of radium or X-rays, etc. Belonging to the lower subdivision of this minor plane, the plane of matter C comprises forms of the most subtle and tenuous matter, the existence of which is not suspected by ordinary scientists. This is comprised of what scientists call the ethers or ethereal substance, a substance of extreme tenuity and elasticity. It acts as a medium for the transmission of waves of energy such as light, heat, magnetism, radio waves, etc. This ethereal substance forms a connecting link between matter, so-called matter, and energy, and partakes of the nature of each. The Hermetic teachings, however, instruct that this plane has 7 subdivisions, as do all of the minor planes. These 7 minor planes are of great interest to the more advanced students of esoterics. Next, above the plane of ethereal substance, comes the plane of energy A, which comprises the ordinary forms of energy known to science. Its 7 subplanes being, respectively, heat, light, magnetism, electricity, and attraction, including gravitation, cohesion, chemical affinity, etc., and several other forms of energy indicated by scientific experiments, but not as yet named or classified. The plane of energy B comprises 7 subplanes of higher forms of energy, not as yet discovered by science, but which have been called nature's finer forces, and which are called into operation and manifestations of certain forms of mental phenomena. The plane of energy C comprises the subplanes of energy so highly organized that it bears many characteristics of life, but which is not recognized by the minds of men on the ordinary plane of development, and being used primarily by those on the spiritual plane alone. Such energy is unthinkable to ordinary man, and may be considered almost as a divine power. The beings employing the same are as gods, compared even to the highest human types known to us. The great mental plane comprises those forms of living things known to us in ordinary life, as well as certain other forms not so well known except to the esoteric. The classification of the 7 minor mental planes is more or less satisfactory and arbitrary, unless accompanied by elaborate explanations which are not in the scope of this particular work. But we may as well mention them. They are as follows: the plane of mineral mind, the plane of elemental mind A, the plane of plant mind, the plane of elemental mind B, the plane of animal mind, the plane of elemental mind C, and the plane of human mind. The plane of mineral mind comprises the states or conditions of entities, which animate the forms known to us as minerals, chemicals, etc. These entities or beings shouldn't be confused with molecules, atoms, and corpuscles themselves, those being merely the material bodies or forms of these entities. These beings can sometimes inhabit the faces and the rocks that children see, but that often escape the awareness of adults. The average mind doesn't generally attribute the possession of mind, soul, or life to the mineral kingdom. But even rocks have consciousness. Esoterics recognize this, and even modern science is rapidly moving toward this point of view as well. The molecules, atoms, and corpuscles have their loves and hates, likes and dislikes, attractions and repulsions, affinities and non-affinities, just as all life forms do. And some of the more daring of modern scientific minds have expressed the opinion that emotions and feelings of the atoms differ only in degree from those of men. We have no time or space to argue the matter here, but esoterics know this to be a fact. Now, there are the usual 7 subdivisions to this plane as well. The plane of elemental mind A comprises a degree of mental and vital development of a class of entities unknown to the average man, but that's recognized by esoterics. They are invisible to the ordinary senses of man. Nevertheless, they exist, and they play their part in the drama of the universe. They have a degree of intelligence between that of the mineral and chemical entities on one hand, and of the entities of the plant kingdom on the other. There are 7 subdivisions of this plane as well. The plane of plant mind and its 7 subdivisions comprises the states or conditions of the plant world. Many new and interesting scientific works called Mind and the Life in Plants have been published already. The plane of elemental mind B, in its 7 subdivisions, comprises the states and conditions of a higher form of elemental or unseen entities playing their part in the universe as well. This is the realm between the plane of plant mind and the plane of animal mind, the entities partaking of the nature of both. The plane of animal mind in its 7 subdivisions comprises the states and conditions of the entities of beings or souls animating the animal forms of life. It is not necessary to go into the details regarding this kingdom or plane of life, for the animal world is as familiar to us as our own. The plane of elemental mind C, in its 7 subdivisions, comprises those entities, invisible, as are all such elemental forms, which partake of the nature of both animal and human life. The highest forms of this plane are semi-human in intelligence. The plane of human mind, in its 7 subdivisions, comprises those manifestations of life common to man, in his various grades, degrees, and divisions. In this connection, the average man of today occupies the 4th subdivision of the plane of the human mind. Only the most intelligent humans have passed into the 5th plane. Esoterics call this the 5th root race. It has taken our race millions of years to reach this stage, and it will take many more years to move on to the 6th and 7th subdivisions and beyond. But remember that there have been races before us which have passed through these degrees and then on to higher planes. Our own race is the 5th with stragglers from the fourth, which has set foot upon the path, and then there are a few advanced souls of our own race who have outstripped the masses and who have passed on to the sixth and seventh subdivision, and some beings still further on. The man of the sixth subdivision will be the Superman. He of the seventh will be the Overman. In our consideration of the 7 minor mental planes, we have merely referred to the 3 elementary planes in a general way. We do not wish to go into this subject in detail in this work, for it doesn't belong to this part of the general philosophy and teachings. But we may well say this much. In order to give you a little clearer idea of the relations of these planes to the more familiar ones, the elementary planes bear the same relation to the planes of mineral, plant, animal, and human that the black keys on a piano do to the white keys. The white keys are sufficient to produce music, but there are certain scales, melodies, and harmonies in which the black keys play their part, and in which their presence is necessary. They are also necessary as connecting links between the several other planes, and for the reader who can read between the lines, a new light upon the processes of evolution, and a new key to the secret door to the leaps of life between kingdoms. The great kingdoms of elementals are fully recognized by all esoterics, and the esoteric writings are full of mention of them. The readers of Bulwer Lytton's masterpiece, Zanoni, and similar tales can find a new light shining on the entities inhabiting these planes. Passing on from the great mental plane to the great spiritual plane, what shall we say? How can we explain these higher states of being? We can speak only in the most general terms. How may light be described to a man born blind? How sugar to a man who's never tasted anything sweet? How harmony to one born deaf? All that we can say is that the 7 minor planes of the great spiritual plane, each minor plane having its 7 subdimensions, comprise beings possessing life, mind, and form, is far above that of man of today, as the latter is above the earthworm. The life of these beings so far transcends ours that we can't even think of the details. Their minds so far transcend ours that to them we scarcely seem to think. And our mental processes seem almost akin to material processes. Their bodies are comprised of the highest forms of matter. Some even say said to be clothed in pure energy. What may be said of these beings? These are beings such as angels, archangels, demigods, etc. On the lower minor planes dwell these great souls whom we call the masters and adepts. Above them come the great hierarchies of the angelic hosts, unthinkable to man, and above those come those who may well be without reverence called the gods. So high in the scale of being are they that their being, intelligence, and power is akin to those attributed to the races of men in their conceptions of deity. These beings are beyond even the highest flights of human imagination, the word divine being the only one applicable to them. Many of these beings, as well as the angelic host, take the greatest interest in the affairs of the universe, and they play an important part in our affairs. These unseen divinities and angelic helpers extend their influence freely and powerfully in the process of evolution and cosmic process. Their occasional intervention and assistance in human affairs may have led to the many legends, beliefs, religions, and traditions of the race. They have superimposed their knowledge and power upon the world again and again. Some have even identified them as ETs or extraterrestrials. But yet even the highest of these advanced beings exist merely as creations of and in the mind of the All, and are subject to the cosmic processes and universal laws. The advanced souls who have outstripped their brethren and who have foregone the ecstasy of absorption by the All in order to help the race on its upward journey along the path. In the East, these are called bodhisattvas. They belong to the universe and are subject to its conditions, and their plane is below that of absolute spirit. Those who have brought with them from other incarnations the knowledge acquired previously comprehend just what is meant by the teachings regarding these planes. And much of these inner teachings is held by the Hermetists as being too sacred, important, and even dangerous for general public dissemination. The intelligent student may recognize what we mean by this when we state the meaning of spirit as used by the Hermetists as akin to living power, animated force, inner essence, essence of life, etc., which meaning must not be confounded with religious. To esoterics, the word spirit is used in a sense of the animating principle, carrying with it the idea of power, living energy, mystic force, etc. And esoterics know that that which is known to them as spiritual power may be employed for evil as well as good in accordance with the principle of polarity. This is a fact which has been recognized by the majority of religions in their conceptions of Satan, Beelzebub, the devil, Lucifer, fallen angels, etc. And so the knowledge regarding these planes has been kept in the Holy of Holies in all of the esoteric fraternities and esoteric orders in the secret chamber of the temple. But this may be said here, that those who have attained high spiritual powers and have misused them have a terrible fate in store for them, and the swing of the pendulum of rhythm will eventually swing them back to the furthest extreme of material existence, from which point they must retrace their steps spiritward along the weary rounds of the path, but always with the added torture, a lingering memory of the heights from which they fell, owing to their own evil actions. The legends of the fallen angels have a basis in actual fact. As all advanced esoterics know, the striving for selfish power on the spiritual planes inevitably results in the selfish soul losing its spiritual balance and falling back as far as it had previously risen. But to even such a soul, the opportunity of a return is given, and such souls make the return journey, paying the terrible penalty according to the invariable law. In conclusion of this chapter, let us summarize. The principle of correspondence embodies the truth as above so below, as below so above. All the 7 Hermetic principles are in full operation on all of the many planes, physical, mental, and spiritual. The principle of mental substance, of course, applies to all the planes too, for they're held in the mind of the All. The principle of vibration manifests on all planes. In fact, the very differences that go to make the planes arise from vibration, as we have explained. The principle of polarity manifests on each plane, the extremes of the poles being apparently opposite and contradictory. The principle of rhythm manifests on each plane, the movement of the phenomena having its ebb and flow, rise and fall. The principle of cause and effect manifests on each plane, every effect having its cause and every cause having its effect. The principle of gender manifests on each plane, the creative energy being always manifest and operating along the lines of its masculine and feminine aspects. As above, so below, as below, so above. This centuries-old Hermetic axiom embodies one of the great principles of universal phenomena. As we proceed with our consideration of the remaining principles, we will see even more clearly the truth of the universal nature of this great principle of correspondence. Chapter 9. Vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. The Kybalion. The great third Hermetic principle, the principle of vibration, embodies the truth that motion is manifest in everything in the universe. Nothing is at rest. Everything moves, vibrates, and circles. This Hermetic principle was recognized by some of the early Greek philosophers, who embodied in their systems, but then for centuries it was lost sight of by the thinkers outside of the Hermetic ranks. But in the 19th century, physical science rediscovered the truth, and the 20th century scientific discoveries have added additional proof of the correctness and truth of the centuries-old Hermetic doctrine. The Hermetic teachings are that not only is everything in constant movement and vibration, but that the differences between the various manifestations of universal power are due entirely to the varying rate and mode of vibrations. Not only this, but that even the all in itself manifests a constant vibration of such an infinite degree of intensity and rapid motion that it may be practically considered as at rest. Not unlike a spinning gyroscope or top. Even on the physical plane, a rapidly moving object, such as a revolving wheel, seems to be at rest. Spirit is at one end of the pole, the other pole being certain extremely gross forms of matter. Between these two poles are millions upon millions of different rates and modes of vibration. Modern science has proven that all that we call matter and energy are but modes of vibratory motion, and some of the more advanced scientists are rapidly moving toward the positions of the esoterics, who hold that the phenomenon of mind are likewise modes or vibrations of motion. Let us see what science has to say regarding the question of vibrations in matter and energy. Science teaches that the vibrations of matter result in heat. Then all the particles of matter are in circular movement, from corpuscles to suns. The planets revolve around suns, and many of them turn on their axis. The suns move around greater central points, and these are believed to move around even still greater, and so on ad infinitum. The molecules of which the particular kinds of matter are composed in a state of constant vibration and movement around each other and against each other. The molecules are composed of atoms, which likewise are in a state of constant movement and vibration. The atoms are composed of corpuscles, sometimes called electrons, ions, etc., which also are in a rapid state of motion, revolving around each other, and which manifest a very rapid state and mode of vibration. and those vibrations of which result from their orbits. And so it is with the various forms of energy. Science teaches that light, heat, magnetism, and electricity are but forms of vibratory motion connected in some way with, and probably emanating from, the ether. Science does not as yet attempt to explain the nature of the phenomenon known as cohesion, which is the principle of molecular attraction, nor chemical affinity, which is the principle of atomic attraction, and of course the greatest mystery of all, gravity, which is the principle of attraction by which every particle or mass of matter is bound to every other particle or mass. These three forms of energy are not as yet understood by science, yet the writers incline to the opinion that these too are manifestations of some vibratory energy. The universal ether, which is postulated by science without its nature being understood clearly, is held by Hermetists to be but a higher manifestation of that which is erroneously called matter. That is to say, matter at a higher degree of vibration. It is called by them the ethereal substance. The Hermetists teach that this ethereal substance is of extreme tenuity and elasticity, and pervades universal space, serving as a medium of transmission of waves of vibratory energy, such as heat, light, electricity, magnetism, etc. The teachings are that the ethereal substance is a connecting link between the forms of vibratory energy known as matter on one end and energy or force on the other. Scientists have offered the illustration of rapidly moving wheels, tops, or cylinders to show the effects of increasing rates of vibration. Imagine a tin toy top revolving very slowly, and no sound of its movement can be heard. The speed is gradually increased, and in a few moments its movement becomes so rapid that a deep growl or low note may be heard. Then, as the rate is increased, the note rises on the musical scale. Then, the motion being still further increased, the next note higher up the scale can be distinguished. Then, one after another, all the notes of the musical scale appear, rising higher and higher as the motion is increased. Finally, when the motions have reached a certain rate, the final note perceptible to human ears is reached, and the shrill, piercing shriek dies away, and silence follows. No sound is heard from the revolving object now, the rate of motion being so high that the human ear cannot register the vibrations. Then comes the perception of rising degrees of heat. Then, after quite a time, the eye catches a glimpse of the object becoming a dull, dark, reddish color. As the rate increases, the red becomes brighter. Then, as the speed is increased, the red melts into an orange. Then the orange melts into a yellow. Then follow successively the shades of green, blue, indigo, and finally violet as the rate of speed increases. Finally, the violet fades away, and all color disappears. The human eye cannot register them, but there are invisible rays emanating from the revolving object. The rays that are used in photographing and other subtle rays of light begin to manifest the peculiar rays known as X-rays, etc. As the constitution of the object changes, electricity and magnetism are emitted when the appropriate rate of vibration is attained. When the object reaches a certain rate of vibration, its molecules disintegrate and resolve themselves into original elements or atoms. Then the atoms, following the principle of vibration, are separated into countless corpuscles of which they're composed. And finally, even the corpuscles disappear, and the object may be said to be composed of ethereal substance. Science does not dare to follow the illustration any further, but Hermetists teach that if the vibration be continually increased, the vibration would mount up the successive states of manifestation and would in turn manifest the various mental stages, and then on spiritward until it would finally re-enter the all, which is absolute spirit. The object, however, would have ceased to be an object long before the stage of ethereal substance was reached. But otherwise, the illustration is correct, inasmuch as it shows the effect of constantly increased rates and modes of vibration. It must be remembered in the above illustration that at the stages at which the object throws off vibrations of light, heat, etc., is not actually resolved into those forms of energy which are much higher on the scale, but simply that it reaches a degree of vibration in which those forms of energy are liberated from the confining influences of the closed orbits of its molecules, atoms, and corpuscles. These forms of energy, although much brighter and higher on the scale than matter, are still entrapped in matter. This is true because creative force becomes involved in its own creations. But the Hermetic teachings go much further than do those of modern science. They teach that even all thought, emotion, reason, will, or desire, or any other mental state or condition is accompanied by vibrations, a portion of which are thrown off, and which tend to affect the minds of other persons by induction. It can be thought of as inductive resonance. This is the principle which produces the phenomena of telepathy. Every thought, emotion, or mental state has its corresponding rate and mode of vibration, and by an effort of the will of a person or of other persons, these mental states may be reproduced, just as a musical tone may be reproduced by causing an instrument to vibrate at a certain rate, just as a color may be reproduced in the same way. By a knowledge of the principle of vibration as applied to mental phenomena, one may polarize his mind at any degree he wishes, thus containing a perfect control over his mental states, moods, etc. In the same way, he may affect the minds of others, producing the desired mental states in them. In short, he may be able to produce on the mental plane that which science produces on the physical plane, namely, vibrations at will. This power, of course, may be acquired only by the proper instruction, exercises, practice, etc. These techniques have been used by all the masters down through history. It's mind over matter, spirit over mind. A little reflection on what we've said will show the seeker that the principle of vibration underlies the power of masters and adepts who were able to rise above the laws of nature, but who in reality are simply using one law against another, and who accomplish their results by changing the vibrations of material objects or forms of energy, and thus perform what are commonly called miracles. As one of the old Hermetic writers has said, he who understands the principle of vibration has grasped the scepter of power. Chapter 10. Polarity. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The Kybalion. The fourth great Hermetic principle, the principle of polarity, embodies the truth that all manifested things have two sides, two aspects, two poles, a pair of opposites with manifold degrees between the two extremes. The old paradoxes which have ever perplexed the mind of men are explained by an understanding of this principle. Man has always recognized something akin to this principle and has endeavored to express it by such sayings as the following: everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything. The Hermetic teachings are to the effect that the difference between things seemingly diametrically opposed to each other is merely a matter of degree. It teaches that the pairs of opposites may be reconciled, and that thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree, and that the universal reconciliation of opposites is effected by a recognition of this principle of polarity. The teachers claim that illustrations of this principle may be had on every hand. They begin by showing that spirit and matter are but two poles of the same thing, the intermediate planes being merely degrees of vibration. They show that the all and the many are the same, the difference being merely a matter of degree of mental manifestation. Thus the law and laws are the two opposite poles of one thing. Likewise, principle and principles, infinite mind and finite minds. Then passing on to the physical plane, they illustrate the principle by showing that heat and cold are identical in nature, the differences being merely a matter of degree. The thermometer shows many degrees of temperature, the lowest pole being called cold, the highest heat. Between these poles are many degrees of heat or cold. Call them either and you'd be equally correct. The higher of the 2 degrees is always warmer, while the lower is always colder. There is no absolute standard all as a matter of degree. There is no place on the thermometer where heat ceases and cold begins. It's all a matter of higher and lower vibrations. The very terms high and low, which we're compelled to use, are but poles of the same thing. The terms are relative. So with east and west. Travel around the world in an eastern direction, and you'll reach a point that is called west. Travel far enough north, and you will find yourself traveling south, and vice versa. Light and darkness are poles of the same thing, with many degrees between them. The musical scale is the same. Starting with C, you move upward until you reach another C, and so on. The differences between the two ends of the keyboard being the same, with many degrees between the two extremes. The scale of color is the same higher and lower vibration. The only difference between the higher vibration of violet and the lower one of red, large and small, are relative. So are noise and quiet. Hard and soft follow the same rule. Likewise, sharp and dull, positive and negative, they're two poles of the same thing. with countless degrees in between. Good and bad are not absolute. We call one end of the scale good and the other evil. A thing is less good than the thing higher on the scale, but the less good thing in turn is more good than the thing next below it, and so on. The more or less being regulated by the position on the scale. So it is on the mental plane. Love and hate are generally regarded as being things diametrically opposed to each other, entirely different, unreconcilable. But we apply the principle of polarity, we find that there is no such thing as absolute love or absolute hate. The two are merely terms applied to the two poles of the same thing. Beginning at any point of the scale, we find more love or less hate. As we ascend the scale, there are degrees of love and hate, and there is a middle point where like and dislike become so faint that it is difficult to distinguish between them. Courage and fear come under the same rule. The pairs of opposites exist everywhere. Where you find one thing, you find its opposite. And it is this fact that enables Hermetists to transmute one mental state into another along the lines of polarization. Things belong to different classes, cannot be transmuted into each other, but things of the same class may be changed. That is, may have their polarity changed. Thus love never becomes east or west, or red or violet, but it may often and does turn into hate. Likewise, hate may be transformed into love by changing its polarity. Courage may be transmuted into fear, and the reverse. Hard things may be rendered soft. Dull things become sharp. Hot things become cold, and so on. The transmutation always being between things of the same kind of different degrees. Take the case of a fearful man. By raising his mental vibrations along the line of fear-courage, he can then be filled with the highest degree of courage and fearlessness. And likewise, the slothful man may change himself into an active, energetic individual simply by polarizing along the lines of that desired quality. The change is not in the nature of a transmutation of one thing into another, but it is merely a change of degree in the same things, a vastly important difference. It is impossible to change heat into sharpness, loudness, highness, etc., but heat may readily be transmuted into cold simply by lowering the vibrations. In the same way, hate and love are mutually transmutable. So are fear and courage. But fear cannot be transformed into love, nor can courage be transmuted into hate. The mental states belong to innumerable classes, each class of which has its opposite poles, along which transmutation is possible. The student will readily recognize that in mental states, as well as in the phenomenon of the physical plane, the two poles may be classified as positive and negative, respectively. Thus love is positive to hate, courage to fear, activity to non-activity, etc., etc. And it will also be noticed that even to those unfamiliar with the principle of vibration, the positive pole seems to be of a higher degree than the negative and readily dominates it. The tendency of nature is in the direction of the dominant activity of the positive pole. In addition to the changing of the poles of one's mental states by the operation of the art of polarization, the phenomenon of mental influence in its manifold phases shows us that the principle may be extended to the influence of one mind over another, of which so much has been written and taught of in late years. When it is understood that mental induction is possible, that is, the mental states, may be produced by induction from others, then we can readily see how a certain rate of vibration or polarization of a certain mental state may be communicated to another person, and his polarity in that class of mental states changed. A mental scientist bringing his own mind up to the desired vibration by his trained will, and by obtaining the desired polarization in his own mind, then produces a similar mental state in the other by induction. The result being that the vibrations are raised and the person polarizes toward the positive end of the scale instead of toward the negative. A knowledge of the existence of this great Hermetic principle will enable a student to better understand his own mental states and those of other people. He will see that these states are all matters of degree, and seeing thus, he will be able to raise or lower the vibration at will, and thus be master of his mental states instead of being their servant and slave. And by his knowledge, he will be able to aid his fellows intelligently, and by the appropriate methods change the polarity when the same is desirable. Chapter 11. Rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The Kybalion. The great fifth Hermetic principle, the principle of rhythm, embodies the truth that everything there is in a measured motion. A flow and inflow, a swing forward and backward, like tides that ebb and flow. The principle of rhythm is closely connected with the principle of polarity described in the preceding chapter. Rhythm manifests between two poles established by the principle of polarity. This does not mean, however, that the pendulum of rhythm swings to the extreme poles, where this rarely happens. In fact, it is difficult to establish the extreme polar opposites in the majority of cases. But the swing is ever toward first one pole, then the other. There is always an action and reaction, an advance and a retreat, a rising and a sinking. This is manifested in everything in the universe. Suns, worlds, men, animals, plants, minerals, forces, energy, mind, and matter. Yes, even spirit manifests this principle. The principle manifests in the creation and destruction of the worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the life history of all things, and finally, the mental states of man. Beginning with the manifestations of spirit, with the all itself, there's ever the outpouring and indrawing, the outbreathing and inbreathing of Brahm, as the Brahmins word it. Universes are created, reach their extreme low point of material, then begin in their upward swing toward spirit. Suns spring into being. Then their height is reached, the process of retrogression begins, and after eons they become dead masses of matter, awaiting another impulse, which starts again their inner energies into activity, and a new solar life cycle is begun. And thus it is with all the worlds. They are born, grow, and die, only to be reborn. And thus it is with all the things of shape and form. They swing from action to reaction, from birth to death, from activity to inactivity, and then back again. Thus it is with all living things. They are born, grow, and die, then they are reborn. So it is with all great movements, philosophies, creeds, fashions, governments, nations, birth, growth, maturity, decadence, death, then a new birth. The swing of the pendulum is ever in evidence. Night follows day, and day follows night. The pendulum swings from summer to winter, and then back again. The corpuscles, atoms, molecules, and all masses of matter swing around the circle of their nature. There is no such thing as absolute rest or cessation of movement, and all movement partakes of rhythm. The principle is of universal application. It may be applied to any question or phenomenon on all the many planes of life. It may be applied to all phases of human activity. There is always a rhythmic swing from one pole to the other. The universal pendulum is ever in motion. The tides of life flow in and out according to law. The principle of rhythm is well understood by modern science and is considered a universal law as applied to material things. But the Hermetists carry the principle much further and know that its manifestations and influence extend to the mental activities of man, and that it accounts for the bewildering cessation of moods, feelings, and other annoying and perplexing changes that we notice in ourselves. But the Hermetists, by studying the operations of this principle, have learned to escape some of its activities by transmutation. The Hermetic masters long since discovered that while the principle of rhythm was invariable and ever in evidence in mental phenomenon, still there were two planes of its manifestation so far as mental phenomena are concerned. They discovered that there were two general planes of consciousness, the lower and the higher, the understanding of which fact enabled them to rise to the higher plane and thus escape the swing of the rhythmic pendulum which manifests on the lower planes. In other words, the swing of the pendulum occurred on the unconscious plane and the consciousness was not affected. This they call the law of neutralization. Its operations consist in raising of the ego above the vibrations of the unconscious plane of mental activity so that the negative swing of the pendulum is not manifested in consciousness. Therefore, they're not affected. It's akin to rising above a thing and letting it pass beneath you. The Hermetic master or advanced seeker polarizes himself at the desired pole, and by a process akin to refusing to participate in the backward swing, or, if you prefer, a denial of its influence over him, he stands firm in his polarized position and allows the mental pendulum to swing back during the unconscious phase. All individuals have accomplished this, more or less unknowingly, by refusing to allow their moods and negative mental states to affect them. They apply the law of neutralization. The master, however, carries this to a much higher degree of proficiency, and by the use of his will, he attains a degree of poise and mental firmness almost impossible of belief on the part of those who allow themselves to be swung backward and forward by the mental pendulum of moods and feelings. The importance of this will be appreciated by any thinking person who realizes what creatures of moods, feelings, and emotion the majority of people are, and how little mastery of themselves they manifest. Stop and consider a moment, and you'll realize how much these swings of rhythm have affected you in your life. How a period of enthusiasm has been invariably followed by an opposite feeling and mood of depression. Likewise, your moods and periods of courage have been succeeded by equal moods of fear. And so it is with the majority of persons. Tides of feeling have ever risen and fallen with them, but they've never suspected the cause nor reason for the mental phenomena. The will is superior to the conscious manifestation of this principle. Although the principle itself can never be destroyed, we may escape its effects, but the principle operates nevertheless. The pendulum ever swings, but we can escape being carried along with it. As the producer of this video, I'd like to interject something about the Hermetic principles not deeply covered by the three initiates in this little book. First, they are correct that the measure of the swing to the right is equal to the measure of the swing to the left. But that's assuming that there are not other forces of cause and effect influencing the return. Such unseen influences like lunar influences on the tides and the spiritual powers of the practitioner, etc. Secondly, a deeper look at Hermetics will reveal the law of rhythm is not fixed, but mutable. It's not always true that a person will have to pay for pleasure with a corresponding degree of pain. If he understands the principle of forgiveness given by the Master, one may not only avoid the inevitable negative swing of karma, but actually benefit from it. Finally, the principle of gratitude has a direct effect on both laws of cause and effect and the law of compensation. Before the incarnation 2,000 years ago, if something was lost, it would be balanced out by the return of equal value, replacing the loss. But with the upgrade of spiritual software from the higher dimensions, the addition of gratitude has been added to the alchemical mix. Now, whatever is lost will eventually be replaced with something better if our consciousness is gratefully attuned and open to receive it from the positive swing of the karmic pendulum, coming from the mind of the All. Now back to the extremely valuable text by the three initiates. The law of compensation works in obvious ways too. For instance, the rich may possess much of what the poor lack, yet the poor are often compensated by things beyond the reach of the rich. For instance, a millionaire may have the inclination toward feasting and the wealth to secure all the dainties and luxuries of the table, while he lacks the robust appetite to enjoy it. He envies the appetite and digestion of the laborer who lacks the wealth and inclinations of the millionaire, but who is given more pleasure from his plain food than the millionaire could obtain, even if his appetite were not jaded. The things that one gains are always paid for by the things one loses, even if they're unaware of the higher spiritual principles and the skill to relegate the losses to the unconscious realms. The law of compensation is ever in operation, striving to bring balance and harmony to an often seemingly chaotic universe. Even if it takes several lifetimes for the return swing of the pendulum of rhythm to manifest. Chapter 12. Causation. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for a law not yet recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. The Kybalion. Nothing happens by chance. The chance is merely a term indicating cause existing but not recognized nor perceived. The principle of cause and effect underlies all scientific thought, ancient and modern. We can imagine nothing outside of the all being outside of the law, and that only because the law is the all. There is no room in the universe for something outside of and independent of law. The existence of such a something would render all natural laws ineffective and would plunge the universe into chaotic disorder and lawlessness. A careful examination will show what we call chance is merely an expression relating to obscure causes, causes that we cannot perceive, causes that we cannot understand. The word chance is derived from the word meaning to fall, as in the fall of dice. The idea being that the fall of dice and many other happenings are merely a happening unrelated to any cause. And this is the sense in which the term is generally employed. But when the matter is closely examined, it is seen that there is no chance whatsoever about the fall of the dice. Each time a die falls and displays a certain number, it obeys a law as infallible as that which governs the revolution of the planets around the sun. Back of the fall of the die are causes or chains of causes, running back further than the mind can follow. The position of the die in the box, the amount of muscular energy expended in the throw, the condition of the table, etc. All are causes, the effect of which may be seen, but back of these seen causes are chains of unseen preceding causes, all of which had a bearing upon the roll of the dice. Toss a penny in the air, and it may come down either heads or tails. But make a sufficient number of tosses, and the heads and tails will just about even up. This is the operation of the law of averages. But both the average and the single toss come under the law of cause and effect. If we were able to examine into preceding causes, it would be clearly seen that it was simply impossible for the die to fall other than it did, under the same circumstances and at the same time. Given the same causes, the same results will follow. There's always a cause and a because to every event. Nothing ever happens without a cause, or rather, a chain of causes. Some confusion has arisen in the minds of persons considering this principle, from the fact that they were unable to explain how one thing could cause another thing, that is, be the creator of a second thing. As a matter of fact, no thing ever causes or creates another thing. Cause and effect deals merely with events. An event is that which comes, arrives, or happens as a result or consequent of some preceding event. No event creates another event, but is merely a preceding link in a great orderly chain of events, flowing from the creative energy of the All. A stone is dislodged from a mountainside and crashes through a roof of a cottage in the valley below. At first sight, we regard this as a chance effect. But when we examine the matter, we find a great chain of causes behind it. In the first place, there was the rain which softened the earth supporting the stone and which allowed it to fall. Then back of that was the influences of the sun, other rains, etc., which gradually disintegrated a piece of rock from a larger piece. Then there were the causes which led to the formation of the mountain and the upheaval by convulsion of nature, and so on and so forth, ad infinitum. In short, we would soon find ourselves involved in a mesh of cause and effect from which we would soon strive to extricate ourselves. Just as a man has 2 parents and 4 grandparents and 8 great-grandparents and 16 great-great-grandparents and so on, until, say, 40 generations are calculated, the number of ancestors would run into many millions. So it is with the number of causes behind even the most trifling event or phenomenon, such as the passage of a tiny speck of soot before our eye. It's not an easy matter to trace the bit of soot back to the early period of the world's history, when it formed a part of a massive tree trunk, which was afterward converted into coal, and so on, until as the speck of soot it now passes before your vision on its way to other adventures. A mighty chain of events, causes and effects, brought it to its present condition, and the latter is but one of the chain of events which will go to produce other events hundreds of years from now. There is no great, there is no small, in the mind that causeth all. Stop to think a moment. If a certain man had not met a certain maid away back in the dim period of the Stone Age, you who are listening to this video wouldn't be here now. Perhaps the same couple had failed to meet, we who now write these lines would not be here either. Nor would you who are listening to this video be here either. And it would also have a direct effect or indirect effect upon every other person in the ages to come. Every thought we think, every act we perform, has its direct and indirect results, which fit into the great chain of cause and effect. Now, in this century, it's known as the butterfly effect. We don't wish to delve far into a consideration of free will or determinism in this little work. Among the many reasons is the principal one that neither side of that controversy is entirely right. In fact, both sides are partially right, according to the Hermetic teachings. The principle of polarity shows that both determinism and free will are but half-truths, the opposing poles of truth. The teachings are that man is both free and yet bound by necessity, depending upon the height of truth from which the matter is examined. The ancient writers express the matter this way: the further the creation is from the center, the more it is bound. The nearer it is to the center, or the all, the freer it is. The majority of people are more or less the slaves of heredity and environment, etc., and manifest very little freedom. They're swayed by the opinions, customs, and thoughts of the outside world, and also by their emotions, feelings, moods, etc. They manifest no mastery worthy of the name. They often assert, "Why, I'm free to act and do as I please. I do just what I want to." But they fail to explain from whence comes the want to, or the as I please. What makes them want to do one thing in preference to another? Is there no because to their pleasing, and no wanting? The master can change these pleases and wants into others at the opposite end of the mental pole. He is able to will, instead of to will because some feeling, mood, emotion, or environmental suggestion arouses a desire in him to do so. The majority of people are carried along like the falling stone, obedient to environment, outside influences, and internal moods, desires, etc., not to speak of the desires and wills of others stronger than themselves. Heredity, environment, and suggestion carry them along without resistance on their part, or the exercise of will. Moved like pawns on the checkerboard of life, they play their parts and are laid aside after the game is over. But the masters, knowing the rules of the game, rise above the plane of material life and place themselves in touch with the higher powers of their nature. They dominate their own moods, qualities, and polarity, as well as the environment surrounding them, and thus become movers in the game. Instead of pawns, they become causes instead of effects. No, the masters don't escape the causation of higher planes, but they fall in with those higher laws, and thus master circumstances on the lower plane. They thus form a conscious part of the law instead of being merely blind instruments. They serve the higher planes and rule on the material plane. But on higher and on lower, the law is always in operation. There's no such thing as chance. The blind goddess has been abolished by reason. We're able to see now with eyes made clear by knowledge that everything is governed by universal laws, which are but manifestations of the one great law, the law which is the all. It is the great Thy will, which is done in heaven. It is true indeed that not a sparrow drops unnoticed by the mind of the all, that even the hairs on your head are numbered, as the scriptures say. Yet don't make the mistake of supposing that man is but a blind automaton. Far from that. Man may use law to overcome laws, and that the higher will always prevail against the lower, until at last he has reached the stage in which he seeks refuge in the law itself, and laughs at the phenomenal laws. Can you grasp the inner meaning of this? Chapter 13. Gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. The Kybalion. The great seventh Hermetic principle, the principle of gender, embodies the truth that there is gender manifested in everything. Embodies the truth that there is gender manifested in everything, on each and every plane of life, on each and every plane of life. At this point, we think it well to call your attention to the fact that gender, in its Hermetic sense, and sex in the ordinarily accepted use of the term, are not the same. The word gender is derived from the Latin root meaning to beget, to procreate, to generate, to create, to produce. A moment's consideration will show you that the word has a much broader and more general meaning than the term sex. The latter referring to the physical distinctions between male and female living things. Sex is merely a manifestation of gender on a certain plane of the great physical plane, the plane of organic life. We wish to impress this distinction upon your minds for the reason that certain writers who have acquired a smattering of the Hermetic philosophy have sought to identify this seventh Hermetic principle with wild and fanciful, often reprehensible theories and teachings regarding sex. The office of gender is solely that of creating, producing, generating, etc., and its manifestations are visible on every plane of phenomena. It's somewhat difficult to produce proofs along scientific lines for the reason that science has not yet recognized this principle as a universal application. But still, some proofs are forthcoming from scientific sources. In the first place, we find the distinct manifestation of the principle of gender among the corpuscles, ions, or electrons, which constitute the basis of matter, as science now knows the latter, and which by forming certain combinations form the atom, which until lately was regarded as final and indivisible. The latest word of science is that the atom is composed of a multitude of corpuscles, electrons, or ions, revolving around each other and vibrating at a high degree and intensity. But later discoveries find is really due to the clustering of negative corpuscles around a positive one. The positive corpuscles seeming to exert a certain influence upon the negative corpuscles, causing the latter to assume certain combinations and create or generate an atom. This is in line with the most ancient Hermetic teachings, which have always identified the masculine principle of gender with the positive and the feminine with the negative poles of electricity, so-called. The best scientific teachings are that the creative corpuscles or electrons are feminine. Old science says they're composed of negative electricity. We say they're composed of feminine energy. A feminine corpuscle becomes detached from, or rather leaves, a masculine corpuscle and starts a new career. It actively seeks a union with the masculine corpuscle, being urged thereto by a natural impulse to create new forms of matter or energy. This detachment and uniting form the basis of the greater part of the activities of the chemical world. When the feminine corpuscle unites with the masculine corpuscle, a certain process is begun. The feminine particles vibrate rapidly under the influence of the masculine energy and circle rapidly around the latter. The result is the birth of a new atom. This new atom is really composed of a union of a masculine nucleus and feminine electrons. But when the union is formed, the atom is a separate thing, having certain properties, but no longer manifesting the property of free electricity. The process of detachment or separation of the feminine electrons is called ionization. These electrons or corpuscles are the most active workers in nature's field. Arising from their unions are the varied phenomena of light, heat, electricity, magnetism, attraction, repulsion, chemical affinity, and the reverse. And all this arises from the operation of the principle of gender on the plane of energy. The part of the masculine principle seems to be that of directing a certain energy toward the feminine principle, and thus starting into activity the creative processes. But the feminine principle is the one always doing the active creative work, and this is so on all planes. And yet each principle is incapable of operating energy without the assistance of the other. In some of the forms of life, the two principles are combined in one organism. For that matter, everything in the organic world manifests both genders. There is always the masculine present in the feminine form, and vice versa. Some leading scientific investigators have announced their belief that in the formation of crystals there was to be found something that corresponded to sex activity, which is another straw showing the direction the scientific winds are blowing. And each year will bring other facts to corroborate the correctness of the Hermetic principle of gender. It will be found that gender is in constant operation and manifestation in the field of inorganic matter and in the field of energy or force. Electricity is now generally regarded as the something into which all other forms of energy seem to melt or dissolve. The phenomena of electricity, even at the very root and source of its manifestations, is clear and unmistakable evidence of the presence of gender in its activity. We're justified in asking you to believe that science at last has offered proofs of the existence in all universal phenomena of the great Hermetic principle, the principle of gender. It's not necessary to take up your time with the well-known phenomena of the attraction and repulsion of atoms, chemical affinity, the loves and hates of the atomic particles. These facts are too well known to need extended comment from us. But have you ever considered that all of these things are manifestations of the gender principle? Submit all physical phenomena to the test, and you'll discern the principle of gender ever in evidence. Now let us pass on to a consideration of the operation of the principle on the mental plane. Many interesting features are there awaiting examination. Chapter 14, Mental Gender. Since Freud, seekers of psychology have accepted the dual mind idea. There are a number of plausible theories regarding the nature and constitution of these two minds. The well-known theory of the objective and subjective minds is now almost universally accepted in the field of depth psychology. The seeker of the Hermetic philosophy is tempted to smile when he reads and hears of these many new theories regarding the duality of mind, each school adhering tenaciously to its own pet theories, and each claiming to have discovered the truth. The seeker turns back the pages of history, and away back in the dim beginnings of esoteric teachings, he finds references to the ancient Hermetic doctrine of the principle of gender on the mental plane. The idea of mental gender may be explained in a few words to seekers who are familiar with the modern theories just alluded to. The masculine principle of mind corresponds to the conscious mind, the active mind, while the feminine principle of mind corresponds to the subjective, subconscious mind, passive, known as the veiled Isis. Let us now delve into the Hermetic teachings. These teachings impart their instruction regarding mental gender by bidding their seekers to turn their attention inward and examine their own self. The first report given is I am. This at first seems to be the final word from consciousness, but a little further examination discloses the fact that this I am may be separated or split into two distinct parts or aspects, seemingly separated in consciousness, but yet working in unison and in conjunction. This is evidenced by the corpus callosum, allowing for communication between the right and left physical hemispheres of the brain. While at first there seems to be only an I existing, a more careful and closer examination reveals that there exists both an I and a me. These mental twins differ in their characteristics and nature, and an examination of their nature will throw much light upon many of the problems of mental influence. Let's begin with the consideration of the me, which is usually mistaken for the I by the seeker, until he presses the inquiry a little further back into the recesses of consciousness. A man thinks of himself in its aspect of me as being composed of certain feelings, tastes, likes, dislikes, habits, peculiar ties, characteristics, etc., all of which go to make up the personality or the self known to himself and others as me. These emotions and feelings change. They're born and die away, and subject to the principle of rhythm and the principle of polarity. Which take him from one extreme of feeling to another. He also thinks of the me as being a certain knowledge gathered together in his mind and thus forming a part of himself. This is the me of a human being. But we've proceeded too hastily. The me of many may be said to consist largely of their consciousness of the body and their physical appetites, being largely bound up with their bodily nature. They practically live there. Some men even go so far as to regard their car as part of their me, and actually almost consider to be part of themselves. A writer has humorously said that men consist of three parts: soul, body, and clothes. Well, this could be updated to include the car. These car-conscious people would lose much of their personality if their automobile was lost. But even many who are not so closely bound up with the idea of personal possessions think of their bodies as being their me. They can't conceive of their self independent of their body. Their mind seems to them to be practically something belonging to their body, which in many cases it surely does. But as man rises in consciousness, he's able to untangle his me from his idea of body, and is able to think of his body as belonging to the mental part of him, which is far closer to the truth. But even then, he's very apt to identify the me entirely with mental states, feelings, etc., which he feels to exist within him. He's very apt to consider these internal feelings as identical with himself, instead of simply things produced by some part of his mentality and existing within him, of him, which is even closer yet to the truth. Eventually he sees that he may change these internal states and feelings all by an effort of will, and that he may produce a feeling or state of exactly the opposite nature, all while the sense of me still exists. So, after a while, he's able to set aside these various mental states, emotions, feelings, habits, and other personal mental belongings. He's able to set them aside into the not-me collection of curiosities and encumbrances, as well as valuable mental possessions. This requires mental concentration and awakening on the part of the seeker. But the task is easily accomplished for the motivated. After this laying aside process of disentanglement has been performed, the seeker will find himself in conscious possession of a self which may be considered in both its I and me dual aspects. The me will be felt to be a mental workshop in which thoughts, ideas, emotions, feelings, and other mental states may be produced. It may be considered as the mental womb, as the ancients styled it, capable of generating mental offspring. It reports to the consciousness as me with latent powers of creation and generation of mental progeny of all sorts and kinds. Its powers of creative energy are found to be enormous. But it still seems to be conscious that it must receive some form of energy from either its I companion or else from some other I before it's able to bring into being its mental creations. This consciousness of me brings with it an enormous capacity for mental work and creative ability. But the seeker soon finds that he's able to will that the me act along certain creative lines and stand aside and witness the mental creation. This part of himself that witnesses is his I. He is able to rest in its consciousness at will. He finds there the consciousness of an ability to project an energy from I into the me, a process of willing that mental creation begin and proceed. He finds that the I is able to stand aside and witness the operations of the mental creation and generation in the me. This dual aspect of mind is in every person. The I represents the masculine principle of mental gender, while the me represents the female principle. The I represents the aspect of being, the me the aspect of becoming. You will notice that the principle of correspondence operates on this plane, just as it does upon the great plane upon which the creation of universes is performed. The two are similar in kind, although vastly different in degree. Remember, as above, so below. As below, so above. These aspects of mind, the masculine and feminine principle, the I and the me, considered in connection with the well-known mental telepathy and psychic phenomena, give the master key to these dimly known regions of mental operations. The principle of mental gender gives the truth underlying the whole field of telepathy and mental influence. The tendency of the feminine principle is always in the direction of receiving impressions, while the tendency of the masculine principle is always in the direction of expressing. The feminine principle has much more varied field of operation than the masculine principle. The feminine principle conducts the work of generating new thoughts, concepts, ideas, including the work of the imagination. The masculine principle is content with the work of will in its varied phases. And yet, without the active aid of the will of the masculine principle, the feminine principle is apt to rest content with generating mental images which are the result of impressions received from outside of herself, instead of producing original mental creations. Persons who can give continued attention and thought to a subject actively employ both of the mental principles, the feminine in the work of the mental generation, and the masculine will in stimulating and energizing the creative portion of the mind. The seeker of psychic phenomena is aware of the wonderful phenomena classified under the head of telepathy, thought transference, mental suggestion, hypnotism, etc. Many have sought for an explanation of these varied phases of phenomena, and in the light of the Hermetic teachings regarding vibrations and mental gender, they will see that the long-sought-for key is at hand. In the phenomena of telepathy, it's seen how the vibratory energy of the masculine principle is projected toward the feminine principle of another person, and the latter takes the seed thought and allows it to develop into maturity. Suggestion and hypnotism operate in the same way. The masculine principle of a person giving the suggestions directs a stream of vibratory energy or willpower toward the feminine principle of the other person, and the latter, accepting it, makes it its own and acts and thinks accordingly. An idea thus lodged in the mind of another person grows and develops, and in time is regarded as the rightful mental offspring of the individual, where in reality it's like the cuckoo egg placed in a sparrow's nest, where it destroys the rightful offspring and makes itself at home. The normal method is for the masculine and feminine principles in a person's mind to coordinate and act harmoniously in conjunction with each other. But unfortunately, the masculine principle in the average person is too lazy to display the willpower, and the consequence is that such persons are ruled almost entirely by the mind and will of other persons, whom they allow to do their thinking and willing for them. How few original thoughts or original actions are performed by the average person? Are not the majority of persons mere shadows and echoes of others, having stronger wills and minds than themselves? The trouble is that the average person dwells almost altogether in his me consciousness, and does not realize that he has such a thing as an I. He is polarized in his feminine principle of mind, and the masculine principle, in which is lodged the will, is allowed to remain inactive and not employed. This is even reflected physically in the loss of testosterone in many of today's men in 2022. The strong men and women of the world invariably manifest the masculine principle of will, and their strength depends materially upon this fact. Instead of living upon the impressions made upon their minds of others, they dominate their own minds by their will, obtaining the kind of mental images desired and even unconsciously dominating the minds of others. Likewise, in the same manner, look at the strong people, how they manage to implant their seed thoughts in the minds of the masses of the people, thus causing the latter to think thoughts in accordance with the desires and wills of those strong individuals. This is why the masses of people are such sheep-like. This is why the masses of people are such sheep-like creatures, never originating an idea of their own, nor using their own God-given powers of mental activity. The manifestation of mental gender may be noticed all around us in everyday life. The actor who makes people weep or cry as he wills is employing this principle, and so is the successful orator, statesman, preacher, writer, or other people who command public attention. The peculiar influence exerted by some people over others is due to the manifestation of the positive I am principle, the principle of mental gender. In this principle lies the secret of personal magnetism, personal influence, as well as the phenomena called hypnotism. A correct understanding of suggestion is necessary in order to intelligently comprehend the varied psychic phenomena associated with it. This is because the whole idea of suggestion depends upon the principle of mental gender and vibration. It's the objective or voluntary mind or will which makes the mental impression or suggestion upon the subjective or involuntary mind. If you will think of the matter in light of the Hermetic teachings, you'll be able to see that the energizing of the feminine principle by the vibratory energy of the masculine principle is in accordance with the universal laws of nature. Hermetic teachings show that the very creation of the universe follows the same law. If the seeker acquaints himself with these matters and uses the theory of mental gender, he'll be able to bring order out of chaos, and may, moreover, readily make himself a master of the subject if he be so inclined. One may find an explanation which will serve to clear away many perplexing difficulties, a key that will unlock many of life's doors. With the aid of the Kybalion, one may go through any esoteric library anew. The old light from Egypt illuminating many dark pages and obscure subjects. This is the purpose of this work. We do not come expounding a new philosophy, but furnish fresh outlines of a great and ancient one. Chapter 15. Final recap. The 7 Hermetic Principles. The principles of truth are 7. He who knows these understandably possesses the magic key, before whose touch all the doors of the temple fly open. The Kybalion. The 7 Hermetic principles upon which the entire Hermetic philosophy are based are as follows: the principle of mentalism, the principle of correspondence, the principle of vibration, the principle of polarity, the principle of rhythm, the principle of cause and effect, and the principle of gender. Now let's briefly summarize. Number 1, the principle of mentalism. The all is mind. The universe is mental. This principle explains that there is a reality behind the unreal world of forms and appearances. To many, this is known as spirit, but which may be considered and thought of as universal, infinite, living, loving mind. Number 2, the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. The Kybalion. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and phenomenon of the various planes and beings in life, and the grasping of this principle gives one the means of solving many a dark paradox and hidden secret of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence to them, we're able to understand much that would otherwise simply be unknowable. The ancient Hermetists considered this principle as one of the most important mental instruments. Just as a knowledge of the principles of geometry enable man to measure distant suns and their movements, so a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables us to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. In studying the individual, the monad, one may understand the archangel. Number 3, the principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. The Kybalion. This principle explains that the differences between different manifestations of matter, energy, mind, and even spirit result largely from the varying rates of vibration. From the all, which is pure spirit, down to the grossest form of matter, everything vibrates. The higher the vibration, the higher position in the scale. The vibration of spirit is at such an infinite rate of intensity and rapidity that it is practically at rest, just as a rapidly moving wheel seems to be motionless. And at the other end of the scale, there are gross forms of matter whose vibrations are so low that they also seem to be at rest. Between these poles, there are millions upon millions of varying degrees of vibration. Number 4, the principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The Kybalion. This principle explains the old paradoxes that have perplexed so many. Opposites are the same, differing only in degree. All opposites may be reconciled. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything, etc. Number 5. The principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The Kybalion. This principle embodies the truth that everything is in measured motion. To and fro goes the way, a flow and inflow, a swing backward and forward, a pendulum-like movement, a high tide and low tide. Between the two poles which exist in accordance with the principle of polarity described a moment ago, there is always an action and reaction, an advance and retreat, a rising and sinking. This is in every aspect of the universe. Number 6, the principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect, and every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not yet recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. The Kybalion. Nothing ever merely happens. There is no such thing as chance. The higher planes do dominate the lower planes, but regardless, still nothing ever entirely escapes the law. The Hermetists understand the art and methods of rising above the ordinary plane of cause and effect, and by mentally rising to a higher plane where they can become cause instead of an effect. Number 7, the principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. The Kybalion. No creation, physical, mental, or spiritual, is possible without the gender principle. The principle of gender is simply about generation, regeneration, and creation on every plane. Everything and every person contains the two elements within him or her. Every male has a female element, and every female contains the male. So with that, this condensed and edited version of the Kybalion for Dummies draws to a close.